Chapter 8: Judgment and Decision Making Based on High Effort. Chapter Overview: High Effort Judgment Processes, High Effort Decision Making Processes, High Effort Thought-Based Decision, High Effort Feeling-Based Decision, and additional High Effort Decision, and lastly, what affect High Effort Decision. High Effort Judgment Processes. Judgment: evaluation of an object or estimate of likelihood of an outcome or event. Judgment is a critical input into the decision process, but it is not the same as decision making, which involve making a selection among options or activities. Decision making: making a selection among options or a courses of action. Judgment and decision making can also involve different processes. Judgment of likelihood and goodness and badness: judging how likely it is that something will occur. For example, when we buy a good or service, we can attempt to estimate the likelihood that it will break down and the likelihood that others will like it, and the likelihood that it will satisfy our needs. Judgment of goodness and badness: evaluating the desirability of something, which means it reflects our evaluation of the desirability of the offering features. For example, if you are planning a trip, you might judge whether the fact that Europe is cold this time of year, or the fact that European travel can be expensive, is good or bad. Anchoring and adjustment: starting with an initial evaluation and adjusting it with additional information, which means consumer first anchor the judgment based on some initial value and then adjust or update the evaluation as they consider additional information. For example, Destiny opened a series of English language schools in China. The word's destiny is a positive initial anchor and encourage consumers to see the schools. Biases in judgment processes: confirmation bias, self-positivity bias, negatively bias, mood and bias, prior brand evaluation, prior experience, difficulty of mental calculation. High effort decision making process: NF set options that are unacceptable. NF set option that the consumer is different to. It is decision tend to be easier when the consideration set contains brands that can be easily compared. Deciding which criteria are important to choice. Goals: goals clearly affect the criteria that will drive a consumer's choice. For example, one goal might be to buy an economical car you can afford. So when the goal is to make a decision, so consumer may evaluate product with unique, so positive attribute and share positive attribute as more favorable than product with unique, negative attribute that share positive attributes. Time: abstract versus concrete thoughts. Time: if the decision is about something we will buy or do immediately. Framing: the way in which the task is defined or represented. Framing: it is gain and losses also applies to buying and selling when the outcome equally positive. Buyers feel better about achieving gains. Decision framing: the initial reference point or anchor in the decision process. Framing the decision as loss versus gain-loss aversion, which means whether a decision is framed positively, how good is this product, or negativity, how bad is this product. influences the evaluation differently. Consumers are more likely to choose a brand with negatively framed claims about a competitor when elaboration is low, but higher elaboration may lead them to conclude that the tactics being used are unfair. High effort thought-based decision. Cognitive decision-making models. The process by which consumers combine items of information about attribute to reach, which means it is describe how consumers systematically use information about attributes to reach a decision. Types of decision processes: compensatory versus non-compensatory models. Compensatory model. It is consumer evaluate how good each of the attributes of the brand in their consideration set is. Example, they make judgment about goodness and badness and weight them in terms of how important the attributes are to their decision. Non-compensatory models required less cognitive effort than compensatory models because consumers set up cut-off levels for each attribute and reject any brand with attribute ranking below the cutoff. Brand attribute models, brand processing, attribute processing.
By the way, I'm Norhana Gumama Ambubot, and I will be discussing my part in this report, the brand-based non-compensatory strategies. Okay, so first is disjunctive model. Okay, so a non-compensatory model that sets acceptable cutoffs to find options that are good. Okay, so meaning it is a model that regulate the allowable secured options. Okay, so next is decision based on product attributes. Okay, so first is attribute processing, comparing brands one attribute at a time. Okay, so meaning assessing something good in a certain brand when comparing it. Okay, so the next is additive difference model, compensatory model in which brands are compared by attribute to brands and a time. Okay, so this additive model is a model wherein they compare certain brands in at the same time. Okay, so next is a lexicographic model, a non-compensatory model that compares brands by attributes, one at a time in the order of importance. Okay, so lexicographic model, they compare certain brand but then in at one at a time. Okay, so ibig sabihin nito ay isang modelong ginagamit sa pag-aaral ng mga proseso ng decision ng mamimili upang suriin ang mga attribute o pamimili sa dalawang bagay. For example, is bibili ka ng car. So, mayroon kang dalawang pagpipilian. So, dapat pag-aralan mo mabuti or mag-decision ka ng mabuti kung ano ang pipiliin mo sa dalawang yon. Okay, so elimination by aspect model, similar to lexicographic model but adds the notion of acceptable cutoffs. Okay, so similar to lexicographic model pero meron slight difference. Ito ay ang pag-add ng notion of acceptable cutoff. Okay, so it is eliminate from being a possibility. different attributes are applied until a single best option is left. Okay, so for example, you are going to buy a new car using the elimination by aspect model. You would first identify the attribute which is the most important to you. Okay, so next is endowment effect. When ownership increases the value of an time. Okay, so meaning it's describe circumstances wherein a higher value on object has been made, and also it's thus refers to an emotional base wherein individual that on certain object value it's more irrationally than its market value. Okay, so next is high effort feeling best decision, effective forecast and choice, effective forecasting, a prediction of how you will feel in the future. Okay, so ibig sabihin nito, used to minimize errors in the upcoming sales. Okay, so next is advertise. Ads sometimes try to induce consumers to imagine themselves in certain situations. Okay, so alam naman natin kung anong ibig sabihin ng advertising. Okay, so a way of promoting and introducing a certain product or services into the public, di ba? Okay, so next is imagery. Plays key role in emotional decision situations. Okay, so ibig sabihin nito because it is how your product or services be known. Okay, so next is additional high effort decisions. Okay, so non-comparable decision. So the process of making a decision about products or services from different categories. Okay, so meaning it is how assessing a decision making takes place. Okay, so next is alternative based strategy, making an incomparable choice based on an overall evaluation. Okay, so meaning it is something to do with the alternatives in comparing and finding a better one is primarily the goal to choose an appropriate product choices. Okay, so next is attribute-based strategy, making a non-comparable choice by making abstract representation of comparable attributes. Okay, so meaning the consumer form abstract representation to help them compare options. Okay, so next is that what effect high effort decisions. Okay, so consumer characteristics. First is mood, can also influence how